Wonderhussy here in a spectacularly beautiful place in the middle of nowhere, Nevada, called Ruby Valley. It's basically this huge kind of marshy plain. There's a bunch of ponds and a big lake where there's fishing. It's a wildlife refuge, and it's all in the shadow of the magnificent Ruby Mountains. I mean, it really is amazingly beautiful out here, especially today. It's July 21st. It's the peak of summer. Everything's green, blue sky, white fluffy clouds, wild horses prancing around in the sagebrush. It's incredible. So I camped at a hot spring down there last night, and well, today I'm sort of making my way southwest. I got to go to a wedding in the San Francisco Bay Area on Saturday. Well, I got a few days to get there, so I thought, let me just take the long way and see what kinds of interesting things I discover along the way. So I've been driving along this off-road, dirt road, just poking along, enjoying the scenery, and I came upon this really cool historical site. I think there's a little trail you can walk around, and there's some old remnants and stuff. We'll go check that out in a minute. But there's a sign here, a monument placed by the Clampers, that tells a little bit about what this place was. It was called Fort Ruby, and it was only here from 1862 to 1869. So you can pause that last frame and read the whole thing if you want, but basically it just says the Army built a fort here because it was halfway between Salt Lake City and Carson City, and they needed some kind of protection for all the pioneers that had started moving westward, you know, like in their covered wagons and dragging all their worldly possessions and all their nagging wives and crying babies and sick kids. Well, they needed to be protected from them Injuns. Excuse me, those Native Americans that were justifiably not too happy about these hordes of white people rolling across their country, cutting down all the trees, pooping and peeing in all the creeks, and, well, generally just kind of making a mess. But this fort also served to protect the Pony Express, okay? Remember the Pony Express? Before they had airmail, way before airmail, before there was even a railroad, well, if you were one of those pioneers and you went all the way to San Francisco to strike it rich in the gold fields or whatever, the only way you could send a letter back home and let them know you were okay, or the only way the folks back home, back east, could send you a letter letting you know, like, mom is sick or whatever, was by sending a letter via this thing called the Pony Express. Now, you probably heard of the Pony Express. It's a pretty popular thing. My understanding is it really only existed for a couple of years, but basically what it was is, it was guys on horseback, on ponies, that rode all the way from, I guess, Independence, Missouri to San Francisco. And they rode, like, flat out as fast as they could on these horses. So they could only go, I think, 10, 15, 20 miles at a stretch before they had to stop and give the horse a break. And then they would get a fresh horse, jump on that, and keep going. So oh gosh, I don't remember exactly how many miles it was, and unfortunately there's no cell signal here, so I can't look it up, but every 10 to 20 miles from Independence, Missouri to San Francisco, there were these Pony Express stations where they would drop off the tired horse, get a fresh horse. I mean, I guess if they needed to take a break and sleep or whatever, they did that, but man, the whole point was just to keep moving and get the mail there as fast as possible. And I can't remember how long it took to get a letter via Pony Express from, say, Independence to San Francisco, but they did it as fast as they could. It was wild. You can still see a lot of Pony Express stations in the West, especially in Nevada. There's still a bunch of them, like they're crumbling ruins now, but there's some along US 50, the loneliest road in America, and, well, apparently this was one of them too. This Fort Ruby is a place that the Pony Express riders would stop, and they knew they'd be safe from the Native Americans, and they could rest up and get a fresh horse, whatever. Right here in the middle of nowhere, halfway between Salt Lake and Carson City. Now, because this location is so desolate, the sign says that the people who were stationed out here called it the worst post in the West. I mean, I guess back then, like, you were really out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, I say I'm in the middle of nowhere today. Well, that's not really true. There's some campgrounds that way, and there's a little store, and, well, the town of Elko is only a couple hours away, and it's got Walmart, okay? If you were stationed at Fort Ruby back in 1862, there was no Walmart anywhere, let alone anywhere nearby where you could go pick stuff up. So even though, I guess, according to this sign, most of these U.S. Army forts in the West were in remote places, this was, I think, the remotest, and that's why it was considered the worst. Okay, so it looks like there's a walking trail with some informational signs, and there's a few ruins left of old Fort Ruby. We'll go check those out. But before we do that, I'd also like to point out that, well, if you watched the video series I made about the Donner Party, okay, talking about the pioneers in America that came west back in the, starting in the 1840s, you could just, if you could get out west, you could pretty much just grab whatever land you wanted. So a lot of people were motivated to go west. And the Donner Party was probably the most famous group of pioneers that went west. Well, most people know them as being cannibals. What happened is they made a series of mistakes and they fell behind, and they were way behind schedule, and they didn't make it to the Sierra Nevada mountains in time before the first snow. And they ended up getting stuck in the mountains in the snow. And, well, yes, they did have to, or many people in their party did resort to cannibalism just to stay alive. And one of the things that set them behind schedule was the fact that there was, even though they were one of the first pioneer wagon trains to go west, like they were, I think 1846, it was one of the very first wagon trains, there was already kind of an established route, like somebody had already ridden ahead and mapped it, and there was water along the way, and they knew all the mountain passes and the fastest way to get there, the safest way. Well, the Donner Party decided to take a shortcut, this infamous shortcut called the Hastings Cutoff, which was unproven, brand new. Some huckster sold a book like, hey, here's a shortcut to the, I think his book was called The Immigrant's Guide to the Overland Trail, and he really wanted you to take this shortcut because I can't remember, he had some financial interest in it, like he owned a fort along that route or something. Anyway, that shortcut, the Hastings Cutoff, comes right through this Ruby Valley. I think the road that I basically just drove in on, which you might be able to see a little bit of there in the distance, that's the same exact route that not only the Pony Express riders would come along on, but that the Donner Party came rolling down. Can you imagine? I mean, it probably doesn't look that different now than it did back in 1846, so you can kind of almost imagine or picture. We could see a cloud of dust coming in the distance, and then as it got closer, you'd be able to make out wagons and oxen and horses, and next thing you know, you'd start to hear the clinking of tin cups and the creaking of wagon wheels and the complaining of little babies. Maybe the bickering of couples. Oh, it's wild, man. That's what I like about Nevada, is so much of it looks exactly the same today in 2021 as it did back in the 1850s or 1840s or 1860s, whatever. Okay, let's go in and check out Fort Ruby. Now, of course, when the Donner Party was rolling through here in 1846, this fort wasn't even built yet. Place wasn't built until 1862. Like, here's a quote from one of the guys. Fort Ruby is a bleak, inhospitable place. But then look what the Native American, the Niwi, Western Shoshone, and they said, this is our home. It is where we have always lived. We have everything we need. What a difference in opinion, huh? I mean, to be honest, I can see both of those. I mean, it's friggin' spectacularly beautiful to me. I love being in desolate places like this, wild horses and hot springs and beautiful mountains and sagebrush, and oh god, it's just gorgeous. But, well, if you were trying to live, it might be kind of a hard scrabble existence. I suppose they could have fished and collected pinyon pine nuts up in the mountains, and I don't know, man. There's a lot of little biting flies that are very bothersome. It is pretty hot in the summer, and it's real cold in the winter. It's all blanketed in snow. So it would have been a tough place to live, I guess, from the perspective of that army dude. Maybe he was from like the big city back east, and he didn't want to be out here. He wanted to go back east because he was courting some fancy city girl, and oh, well, anyway, don't let my imagination get me carried away. Let's check out this next sign. Oh, yeah, look, there's a picture of the guy who said that about it being bleak and inhospitable. He does look like a city boy. Oh, actually, though, it says he was from California, so he was, I guess, one of the early settlers himself. Basically, this fort was staffed by regiments of the California Volunteers, commanded by him. But anyway, what this sign basically says is, as more and more immigrants started going west, pioneers, it says exactly what I just said. The Indians kind of, became angry because it says, throughout the 1850s and early 1860s, the immigrant trails became scenes of steadily worsening conflict. The immigrants' livestock devoured the grasses whose seeds were a mainstay of the Native American diet. Remember, I was just saying it would be really hard to get by here with what little food sources there are. And then to have all these white people come through with all their friggin' oxen and horses eating all your grass, trampling all the friggin' ponds and pools. It doesn't say this here, but I know for a fact that they did pee and poop in the creeks, and that's why they all got dysentery and cholera. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Picked the trails clean of firewood. So the Native Americans retaliated by raiding wagon trains, making off with livestock, food, and supplies. Well, who can blame them, really? But anyway, that was why they had to build this fort, to try and protect those who were only trying to fulfill manifest destiny. Okay, I guess right here is where the old barracks used to be for the enlisted men, and there's an old photo, actually, which is cool, from 1868 of what the barracks looked like. I mean, it looks like a pretty rough building, but, cozy enough. But it doesn't sound like it was a very luxurious lifestyle, because it says the barracks were overcrowded, and all they got to eat were salt, pork, and beef, dried beans and peas, hard bread, and coffee. But it doesn't sound all miserable, because it also says here, I guess this one wagon train came through and there was no lack of blooming beauties from Missouri, Iowa, and Illinois, who of course gladly accepted invitations from the gallant soldier boys to grace the dance by their presence. So basically, whenever a wagon train came through that had hot chicks of marriageable age, well, they had a party. So, hey, it wasn't all salt, pork, and hardtack. Okay, it looks like there used to be a flag flying there, but I don't know if that can't be old enough to be from the 1860s, but here's another sign, and this one basically talks about, I guess they finally came to peace with the Western Shoshone, and they had a treaty, the Treaty of Ruby Valley. But, spoiler alert, the white man didn't honor his end of the treaty. I guess basically the Native Americans agreed to stop attacking the settlers and to allow mining, transportation, and settlement of their lands in exchange for, they were going to get some 6x6 mile reservation. And the government was supposed to compensate them for their lost food source by supplying them with $5,000 worth of cattle and provisions every year for 20 years. Well, according to this sign, that never really happened. They gave them some blankets and a few trinkets and a little bit of food, but never lived up to what was promised. And gosh, I don't even know. I think there might be a really small Ruby Valley reservation today, but to be honest, if it's anything like the other native reservations I've been to, it's probably pretty grim. Okay, wow, look at this old log cabin. This is cool. It's interesting though, because according to the sign, the way this cabin is constructed, kind of hodgepodge, was unlike the way they would have constructed stuff on the military fort. So they don't actually think this was part of the military fort. They think it might be, it says civilian merchants called sutlers operated stores at military posts and sold coffee and sugar and stuff, just civilian traders. They think it might be a cabin belonging to one of them, but it says, we are still left wondering why the builders used such mismatched materials. Were they in a hurry? Did they salvage unused logs from the fort? Oh yeah, because you can see a picture here of the cabins that the military guys built, and they are squared away. Nothing like this. It's funny though, like if I built this, I'd be pretty proud of myself, because I'm sure it wasn't easy. And you know what? It would do what you needed it to. Keep the snow off you in the winter and keep the sun off you in the summer. Wow, it's nice in here. It's at least 10 degrees cooler. Holy moly, yeah, that is rough hewn though. Look at that. They didn't even bother to... They basically just cut the branches off the tree trunk. They didn't bother to... What do you call that when they make them round? Okay, and then just down the trail from the cabin, there's another sign that talks about the Pony Express. And basically, yeah, they were going from Salt Lake City to Sacramento, and this is where we are here. And then this kind of does follow US 50. If you ever take that drive, it's really cool. And then it says here too, I think I was right, Pony Express only lasted 20 months during 1860 and 1861. I think that's because the telegraph was completed in 1861. So even though it was really expensive to send a telegraph back then, I mean, it was just a lot easier and a lot faster than putting a letter in a guy's pouch in Independence and having him ride all the way to Sacramento. Can you imagine? Speaking of can you imagine, though, like, can you imagine being a pioneer in one of those wagon trains and day after day after day of not seeing any signs of civilization, and then you come across even these humble little log cabins? You'd be so excited to see another person because, well, sadly, they didn't consider Native Americans to be, I don't think they considered them to be actual humans. So this would have been like the only people they'd seen in a long time. Okay, it looks like there's another little log cabin down here. Oh, it's a spring house. It served as cold storage for meat, wild game, and fruits and vegetables. Oh, how interesting. I guess this is all restored. I don't think there was really much left here at all after the Army basically just abandoned it in, what was it, 1869? Wow, look at this spring house. This is cool. Oh, it's nailed shut. Dang it, I sure would like to go inside. Can't really see through the fence either. Sorry about that. But you can see how it's built right into the side of the earth there. So I bet it does stay nice and cool in there. And then all that dirt on the roof too. Oh, look here. There are some actual remnants of the fort, I guess. That's what that pile of rocks there is. Let's see, what does the sign say? Oh, it says that when the fort closed, they auctioned the building off to local ranchers who dismantled the structures and salvaged the lumber. Okay, a couple buildings were left behind, including two that eventually became part of the Joseph Tognini Ranch. So it looks like the Tognini family bought a couple of the buildings, or I guess they built their ranch at this site, and they were still using it until 1957. But then there was a fire in 1992 and all the historic buildings burned down, and this is the only thing left. So this was the fort, and then it was the Tognini Ranch, and now it's just a pile of rocks. Oh wow, here's a sign that does talk about what the Native Americans out here ate. And again, compared to a lot of places in Nevada, this is really lush. I mean, at least you have plenty of water to drink. But as to what they ate, it does say, well, up here it says, they followed a seasonal round from their villages in the foothills to every part of the valley. From the lakes and the marshes, they got tule and waterfowl. Oh, I didn't know you could eat tule. Rabbits and pronghorn antelope they hunted. There was rice grass, roots and berries, and then, of course, pinyon pine nuts up in the mountains. So that was their diet, man. It was like tough living. Pine nuts, bighorn sheep, this rice grass. I guess they called themselves the Wadaduka, which means grass seed eaters. So yeah, when the pioneers came along and their oxen ate all their food, no wonder they were mad. Holy cow, I mean, it doesn't look like that much food to begin with. Look, it says here, tule. They called it badiba. This abundant, versatile wetland plant was cut and used for everything from lodges, boats, and baskets to duck decoys. Oh, okay, I guess they didn't eat the tule. They just used it for making stuff. Wow, well, whatever the case, I can certainly understand why they were upset that all these white people were coming in and messing up their gig, you know what I mean? Oh, wow, okay, I guess they identified the site where the officers lived right here. Remember how earlier we saw where the enlisted men lived in those pretty rough barracks? Well, according to this sign, it says officers at Fort Ruby enjoyed the privilege of bringing their families with them. So there were a few women out here and kids, and in fact, they did this archaeological dig back in, I don't know when, but look at the stuff they found. Buttons, this creepy doll's head. Oh my gosh. If I ever found something like that doll's head in the desert, I would lose my lid. I would be very tempted to keep it, but I would probably turn it over to the appropriate authorities because, I don't know, I feel like stuff like that is really cool and should be shared. But then again, where did that doll's head end up? You know what I mean? Is it in a museum somewhere? And if so, where is that museum? And can I go to it? Okay, I think there's one more sign. Oh, they had a hospital. Can you imagine what kind of medical care they had out here? I mean, this stuff was all excavated right here. Old coins, old bullets. I guess that's like a medallion from a soldier's uniform. How cool is that? Okay, well, that's pretty much all there is to the old Fort Ruby historical site. But I'm glad I stopped here because this is such an out-of-the-way place. I can't imagine that they get very much traffic out here. And, well, if I hadn't decided to take the scenic route to San Francisco, well, I never would have seen it either. That's one cool thing about taking the scenic route. Always take the scenic route if you can. And by the way, the irony isn't lost on me that just like all those settlers back in the day, I too am headed to San Francisco. I'm just gonna get there a lot faster than they did because I'm not in a covered wagon.